Good evening, Milwaukee. This is Doug Cornfield with the Pulling Each Other Along show and the 104.1 River West Radio. We've got a great guest for you coming up. Welcome. I've got my Dave's back. We've got our Dave's back. I've got Dave Clark and I've got Dave Geist. Dave Geist had a very busy summer.
Yes, very busy
at baseball camp, and Dave Clark and we were doing some travel, and I was actually down in Florida for a couple of weeks or a week and then back, and I've been doing all sorts of travel. And so it's good to be back here on the Pulling Each Other Along show, the 104.1 River West Radio. And all you Facebook friends out there, YouTube, welcome. And we really do have an exciting guest today, and kind of the background of meeting Michelle Y. Green, we should say, because there's, I guess, like Dave Clark, there's a million Michelle Greens, so we want to make sure she is differentiated by Michelle Y. Green. And I didn't really meet Michelle. Dave, you read her book, right? Several years ago?
That's the beginning of this. I read her book, and A Strong Right Arm, which is about Mamie Peanut Johnson, who was the first female player for the Indianapolis Clowns in professional baseball. And Michelle wrote a book about it. I got it in the library down here in Florida, read it, wrote Michelle a letter and mailed it to whatever address I could find for her. And she never answered my letter.
So
that's my lead in, is that
I don't know why
Michelle just ignored my letter for about 3 or 4 years.
That's all right. In the mood too, and I've never responded either. So
that's true too. That's true. So anyway, that's my lead in, Doug. And
and so
you asked me to. She got a hold of you.
Well, not really. You asked me to get a hold of her, and so I found her on LinkedIn. And I sent her a message, I'm thinking 2-3 years ago. And sometime this past spring, she replied. And she didn't know anything about Dave Clark, the former player for the Indianapolis Clowns, all those kind of things. And so, lo and behold, I told her about the famous Dave Clark, Indianapolis Clown, and only professional baseball player to ever play on crutches. And there we are, Dave. So for our viewers that don't know Dave, amazing story. And so Michelle instantly connected with the story, wanted to meet you. Well, we did a Zoom together, and we introduced, because it was still in the midst of the COVID, and you were in Florida, I was here in New York, and she was in Washington, D.C. So we did a Zoom, we met Michelle, and lo and behold, now she is a guest on the Pulling Each Other.
One more step, though, Doug. We did meet her in person. Along with her sister,
did
came up to the Corning camp.
We did just, of course, she wanted a picture with you, not with me, but that's pretty typical. So there's her and her sister Adrian are with Dave at our Disability Dream and Do camp. Just 3-4 weeks ago, I don't even know. It's all blurred now at this point. And so she made the trek up here. So without further ado. She said she was nervous backstage, so we have to make sure she's not nervous. We have Michelle.
Hi, everybody.
Hey, we're gonna put Michelle on the front burner, and because like we say, this show is about you. We'll ask you some questions, but we want you to tell your story. You have actually probably 2 shows that we could do. One about the Indianapolis Clowns, and then one. For those that don't know, her father, pictured here, was a Tuskegee Airman, and that's pretty historic to be a part of that crew, and I'm sure you're proud of that. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're writing a book about that currently?
I am, yes. I'll talk about that a little later in the show. Yeah.
Very good. So welcome, Michelle, to the Pulling Each Other Along. You can say hi to Milwaukee. If we field some questions, we'll field those through our Facebook feed, and people can feel free to ask questions if they're live on YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn.
Wonderful.
Anyway.
Hi, Milwaukee. Hi, everyone out there. Yes,
of course, everyone knows the connection with Milwaukee and the Clowns, right?
That's right. That's
right. What's the connection, Dave?
Well, I think one of the players from the Clowns played in Milwaukee, right?
Dave?
Henry Aaron?
Doug.
What's that?
One of the more famous Indianapolis clowns ended up playing in Milwaukee.
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. Aaron.
Mr. Hank Aaron.
Yes.
Yes, he was on Mamie's team. That's right.
Yeah. Yes, he was.
And then he was a famous Milwaukee Brave.
Yes, Milwaukee Brave, Atlanta Brave, then Milwaukee Brewer.
Yeah, Milwaukee Brewer too. Yeah, so there is a lot of.
I'd like to lead in with Michelle if I could.
Go ahead.
Because the name of our show is the Pulling Each Other Along show, and in essence, Mamie pulled a lot of people along.
She did
with her career. I mean, it was a profession that particularly at that time, that women just didn't approach. They were shunned. So explain to our listeners and viewers how your connection to Mamie began and your viewpoint of her. Because you actually met her before she passed on. You actually met her.
I did.
That was your impetus for writing the book. So if you could explain that story, I think that's very interesting.
Thank you. Well, Dave, first I offer you an apology for neglecting your letter. I'm blaming on the Upper Marlboro post office, and I live on a street called Reverend Rainsford Drive that nobody can find, so that's not my fault. I very seldom go on LinkedIn, and so I was just, I don't know, one night I went on the site, and that's when I found the note about Dave's letter. And that's when we made the connection, and the rest is history. In terms of how I met Mamie, I had a son. I have two sons now, Brian and Evan. But the youngest son, Evan, wanted to learn to play baseball. And he played t-ball, and he wasn't that great at it. So I was in Upper Marlboro going down to do some errands, and I came across the Negro Leagues baseball shop. It said grand opening. So I did a U-turn in the street, went inside the baseball shop, and to my surprise, there was all kinds of books, paraphernalia, videos, t-shirts, all in this little small bookstore. So I went inside and I started flipping through the t-shirts. Originally, I wanted to get something for Evan to encourage him, but I was intrigued by a t-shirt that had a woman on it. It said Mamie Peanut Johnson, and there was an image of her throwing a baseball. Now, because I'm a writer, I'm always good at sniffing out a story. I tell my students, you're always writing. If you're not physically writing, you're pre-writing. You're always sniffing out a good story. So I bought the t-shirt, I took it to the register, and the clerk said, would you like to have this autographed? And I said, of course I would. He said, well, Mamie's in the back of the store. I said, you're kidding. So I went back there, and there was Mamie. She was signing autographs. She was signing baseballs, t-shirts, and so forth. And I said, okay. I introduced myself, and I said, Mamie, has anybody written your story? And I said, I'm a writer. Has anyone written your story? She says, no one has written my story, but I have been looking for someone to write my story because of the three women who ever played in the Negro Leagues. I'm the only one left. And that's the connection that we made. It took a couple of weeks before I got the courage to go back and sit down and actually interview her. And the process of doing research actually took about 3 years to do the research. Once I did the research, it only took about 3 months to write the book. And I'll take a little interlude here to see if there's any response. And I'd like to go and talk a little bit about the research that I did for the writing of The Strong Right Arm.
So, one of the things that my 25-year-old daughter who works with us, her name's Dominique, and when I told her, they were asking about you because you were just at the disability baseball camp, and they said, why did her and her sister come up? And so I told her the connection and that you whatever, because I really hadn't explained all that. And one of the things, she's 25 years old. She's a young woman. And she goes, why didn't I ever know there was a professional woman that played professional baseball? And she was actually a little annoyed about that whole thing, that here, this rich history of women that played at a very, very high level. And here she is a woman and she never knew it.
Right.
And so thank you for taking the time for all women, not just African American women, but all women, to get this story known. And I think that's a great scenario, a great thing as well. These things need and should be known, in my opinion.
We're very fortunate today, young women especially, but all of us, that we have so much of that history documented. We have, well, just as recently as the Olympics, all of the women Olympians, some that are well known, some that are less well known, but young women are seeing those. There are women who have become active in a lot of social movements and so forth. A lot of role models. There's Michelle Obama. There are people in all levels of government, women in all levels of politics, in medicine and so forth, that young people can emulate. But when I grew up, I was born in when I grew up, there were not many African American role models, male or female. And that's why the writing that I do is for historical fiction and biography, particularly of African American stories. I call them the holes of history. Those are the things that we don't know that we should know. So if I can just digress a little bit and talk to you about the research that I did for Mamie. One of the expressions that I use, not only am I an author, but I have been a professor of English in the past. And so what I like to tell my writing students is that the devil is in the details. And what that means is you don't just want to tell the story in a linear fashion. You want to give as much richness to your story as you possibly can, as much details. The things that make people go, oh, I didn't know that. So I didn't really know a lot about baseball. And unfortunately, neither did Evan at that time. So one of the first things I did was I joined Evan's Little League team for a season. Now, by joining it, I went out and watched every game, and then I worked with the coaches to learn the kind of pitches that Mamie threw. So they would position my hands around the ball. I could feel the seams. They would tell me how to throw a curve, a knuckleball. I couldn't do it very well, but at least I learned the mechanics of it. I learned how to trash talk. I learned how to throw signals.
Wait a minute, this was trash talking in baseball.
I signed the contract, so we can't trash talk on the air.
Well, we can after the show.
Yes.
Dave and I know, we know how to trash talk.
Yeah. A little bit.
But so I also traveled with Mamie on many card and book signings, and I got to hear her voice. Her mother was actually from Washington, D.C. There we go, at a book signing at Enoch Pratt Library. There's Mamie, and we're doing a book signing of A Strong Right Arm. In fact, I'm wearing the same jersey. And so what we would do is we would travel along with one another, and I would hear her voice because her first 8 years were in South Carolina. And because I have lived different places around the world, I have a great facility for hearing different language. I was just explaining this to a friend the other day. Mountain speak is different from speech in the Deep South, which is different than the way Northerners speak. And so she had a particular way of saying things. And so in the book, I tried to replicate her language and the way that she spoke. One of her favorite words was honey. Honey this, honey that. And so you'll hear a lot of honeys in my book. The other thing I did was, of course, I did the research with photographs. I got her to show me her family photographs. And if you look inside the book, you'll see pictures of her mother when she was young, her aunt Sidonia Belton, one of her cousins who taught her how to pitch the curveball, some of the Negro Leagues players. There's even a picture of Mamie and me in the Negro Leagues bookshop. So doing my own photo research was very, very exciting because I really got to go down to the Library of Congress, the Negro Leagues baseball shop, and collect all the photos that I used in my book.
Wow.
So, go ahead.
Sounds like you really dove headfirst into this. That's awesome. That had to be very interesting, just learning all the detail and capturing all this.
It was. Let me tell you about my brief career in baseball. The last night of the season.
Did you get thrown out like Dave Clark?
I never got a chance. By the way, my family would often go to Evan's games, especially my father. You haven't heard trash talk to you, my father. Anyway, the last night of the season, they let the parents play the kids. Now, at this point, this was Little League. So Evan might have been, 8 or 9, somewhere in that range. And he said, okay, now all the parents, if you're right-handed, you have to bat left and so forth. And then they turned around to me and said, Mrs. Green, you can bat regular. So I just sat on the sidelines after that. But yes, it was a real adventure. And believe it or not, Evan went on to play baseball all the way through high school. He pitched, he played first base. He could play all positions. And he actually wanted to play baseball professionally until he kind of tore out his rotator cuff. But now he's a fine musician. So I think he landed where he needed to be.
Very nice.
Very, very good. Dave, you got to have some questions here. Dave Clark, I'm pointing to. I forget that I have 2 Daves on this show, but your connection with the Indianapolis Clowns, being the last majority owner of the team and still hold the rights to the team. Hopefully, you got some royalties from all that stuff that Michelle has on there.
We get checks for 2-3 cents every once in a while.
Yeah.
We get
He'll take it. He'll take it.
It's meal money, isn't it?
That's correct.
Actually, it wasn't.
Right. That's right. Now, I go back. The thing that I find intriguing and at the same time unbelievable is that there are many people and real baseball fans out there that have no idea that there was a Negro Leagues. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of people that have no idea that Hank Aaron actually started his career in the Negro Leagues. That was his springboard to becoming, in my mind, still the all-time home run king.
Right.
And you're going to find that more and more as we move along, too.
What's that?
I'm saying I think you're going to find that more and more as time progresses.
I do too, and I mean, I would hope that all the guys that played Dave during our era have some idea of the richness of the history of the Negro Leagues. We tried to, we signed the best players that we could find, regardless of color or whether Hispanic, whatever. We signed the best players that we could find for our teams.
And yet I still
stress the heritage that was behind the Negro Leagues. Always said, the first white player for the Indianapolis Clowns was in 1968 when they reverse integrated. And that happened to be Harry Chappis, who went on to play for the Chicago White Sox. So my own personal history with the Clowns began in 1975 with a Mr. George Long. I got an invite to come out and try out, and I did. And I at that point in time, I still knew the history of the team. I was a baseball fan. I knew the history of the team and the richness of their history. So it was really an honor to get invited out to try out. And then I made the club, and we were getting $5 a day meal money, but $5 a day stretched a long way back then, and so I'm just glad that in that picture there is the old Comiskey Park, where we happened to play every season. Bill Veeck was the owner of the White Sox at that particular time, and so I feel it was really a privilege and an honor to represent the Indianapolis Clowns. And I don't know how much history delving you went into with the Negro Leagues for your book with Mamie. But again, there's a lot of rich history in the Negro Leagues, and it was a big part of American culture.
Right.
One thing I wanted to point out was the name clowns. Inevitably, when I used to go out to book chats in schools, they would say, well, why the name clowns? Isn't that kind of, why would you want to play on a team named clowns? Especially if you're in the Negro leagues, But what you don't understand is at that time, players were paid pretty much by how many people attended the games and whether they won or lost. So the clowns were actually they were a authentic professional baseball team, but they chose the name clowns because if you've ever heard of the Harlem Globetrotters, these baseball players would come out before the game actually started and do all kinds of somersaults. They would kind of warm up the crowd. People would come into the gates, and they would. And what Mamie would say was, yes, our name might be the Clowns, but as soon as the game starts, that's when the clowning around stopped, and we were there to play. I thought that was a great anecdote. I also wanted to mention, as a part of my research, when I finally this is really significant. This shows a little bit of the relationship that we had. I came to the bookshop one day, and she was uncharacteristically disturbed. She usually was very, ebullient, very happy, good sense of humor. And I came in, she seemed deeply troubled. And I said, Mamie, what's the problem? And she said, well, on the 60 Minutes last night, they had a segment on a new ball player. Her name was Ilsa Borders, and she was playing for the Colorado team. And they said that she was the first woman ever to play professional baseball. And she said, that's not true. I was the first woman to pitch professional baseball. And I said, well, what would you like to see happen? And she said, well, they need to know the truth. They need to have it corrected. Well, as it turned out, there's an expression, God don't like ugly. I happened to be freelancing for Broadcasting and Cable magazine, so I had all the numbers in my Rolodex at that time. So I called the producers of 60 Minutes, and I said, you've made a terrible mistake, gave them the rundown about Mamie, and they said, well, we don't have any proof of that. And I said, well, I've got all the proof, I've got the research, and I'll be glad to send it over to you. And so they hemmed and they hawed, and I said, you've got until Tuesday to make this right, or I said, you'll be hearing from us. So sure enough, by Tuesday, I got a call from the producers, and what they did the following Sunday is they issued a retraction on air for Mamie Peanut Johnson and showed her picture as the first woman to pitch in professional baseball. And that kind of cemented our relationship.
That's very
That's
cool.
really interesting. I did not see those shows, but that's really interesting.
Yeah. And another thing, once I finally started writing the book, when a writer sits down, some people say, well, what, do you get the title first? Do you start writing? How do you write? Well, it's different for every writer. But I sat very quietly after absorbing all of this information, hearing her voice. And the first words that came to me was, Mama told me I must have been born with a baseball in my hand. And I realized that was how I was going to write the book. It wasn't going to be me telling the story of Mamie. It was going to be her voice telling her own story. So when you go into the book, and hopefully I can read a sentence or two a little bit later on, you'll hear the voice of Mamie. And when I would go to school visits, I would try to replicate her accent because she had this, Southern drawl, this honey this and honey that. When I finally got the book finished and sent it off to my agent, and she sent it on to the publisher, I got a 2-word review, and it says, you rock. And I thought, I hope that's good. I hope that's good. So we went ahead and went through a couple of revisions, and before it went to press, I said, okay, Mamie, it's time for you to read the book. I want you to read the manuscript. That's what it's called before it goes onto production. I said, I want you to read the manuscript and tell me if I did anything wrong. And she says, honey, I don't want to read the manuscript. I don't want to read it until I had the book in my hand.
Wow.
Took a deep breath and I said, okay. So when it came, I got 30 books in a box and I opened them up and went down to her house, put it in her hands, and before she opened the book, she broke down and started crying, and we had a good cry together. So that was a really neat point in my life.
This is the Pulling Each Other Along show, and to kind of pull that theme together, how do you think you as friends? Obviously, I think you became friends.
We did.
Through this time. How do you think you pulled each other along through this process?
Actually, it was closer than friends. She used to call me her daughter, and she would introduce me as her daughter when we would go out together. She pulled me along because that was I've been a writer since I was in the 5th grade, but this particular book, if I might say, really hit it out of the park. When it first came out, the reviews were just stellar. It won the Woodson Award for Social Studies. Booklist kept reviewing it over and over and over. There has been a film in production called Throw Like a Girl. And even though the book was written decades ago, I still get orders. I still meet wonderful people like Disability Dream and Do that take the lessons that Mamie learned in her relationship and use it to pull other people along. So she pulled along my career as a writer. I pulled along her notoriety because no one knew her. And now there are Little League baseball teams named after her. She's represented in Cooperstown. There's a playground in Washington, D.C. named after her. There's a mural on Ben's Chili Bowl, which is it's a landmark in Washington, D.C. So because of that reciprocity in our relationship, we lifted each other up. We pulled each other along, and we're still doing it, even though she has passed. For example, I just found out today on Facebook, there is a Mamie Peanut Johnson fan site, Facebook, that I knew nothing about. So,
wow.
Her legacy continues.
Very, very nice. Very nice. Well, we have about 1 minute left, 1.5 minutes left for the live portion. We are on the 104.1 River West Radio. And just real quickly, let's end the show, the live portion of the show, with one of our famous questions. And somebody asked about it here. I'm looking for it and Tom and Laura. There you go. Yeah. Tom and Laura want to know, before we end, you got 1 minute, maybe 35, 40 seconds. You got to figure out, what is your favorite donut?
Mine?
Yeah, your favorite donut.
I like Boston cream donuts.
Oh, that's the right answer.
With the custard on the
inside. That's the right answer.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Well, Tom and Laura, I hope you're happy that we got that question in on the live portion of the River West Radio. And this has been Michelle Y. Green, author. And just really, there's so much more. And so for people that want to stick around on the after show, we encourage you to do that, or join us on Facebook, YouTube, now even LinkedIn, all sorts of great stuff. So thank you for joining us on this portion of the show. Thank you, River West Radio, for having us.
Thank you.
You can say goodbye to Milwaukee for now. We got everybody say goodbye. Bye. Yeah, there we go. Bye, Milwaukee.
Good night, everybody.
There we go. So now you can say whatever you want.
Hang out, baby.
You can get thrown out of the park now, just like Dave Clark.
I'm on my way to Krispy Kreme right now.
That
went by in a hurry, to be honest with you.
It did. It really did.
Yeah, 29 minutes can fly by. For folks that are out there, we've got several folks listening in on Facebook and whatever else. If you have any questions for Michelle, I'm sure she will pledge those. But we didn't even get into your father, and maybe we should save that for another show, because
that would be wonderful. Yeah.
we could talk about the clowns all day, and we could do because somebody like your father obviously pulled people along, and I'm sure you could dedicate a whole show to him and talk about that. But is there anything real quick that you would want to say about your father just on this show?
Yes, I would. My father, Eddie, Eddie L. Young, was a Tuskegee Airman who was triple rated, which meant that he distinguished himself as a pilot, a bombardier, and a navigator. He also broke the sound barrier right after Chuck Yeager broke the sound barrier. And he served in three conflicts, World War II, Korea, and he was with Special Ops in Vietnam.
Wow.
Yeah. And the book that I'm working on is called The Devil's Bargain, which is about the Vietnam era conflict.
Wow. That's that's amazing, and to have that legacy with your father. I mean, my dad was in between wars and got to go over to Japan and clean up, but he was actually part of the entertainment, and it's still a proud moment. Meaning entertainment, he played basketball in Army's teams and went around to all the different where all the servicemen and he got to play basketball. So he loved his time in the Army because he was doing what he loved to do, which was play basketball and run track. But still it's a proud memory to know that, my father served and was a veteran, a war veteran, technically. I mean, he was over on foreign soil, and he didn't meet the battle criteria or whatever, but still very important part of the service. And so, yeah, go ahead, Dave. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, one of our, I'm trying to read over here some of the comments we're getting. One of our former general managers with the Indianapolis Dons, Al Tobin, is listening in, and he loves history with the service and so forth. And he wanted to know what you thought about the movie.
Which movie?
The movie about the Tuskegee Airmen.
Oh, yeah, he had a great opinion about that. There were actually two. One was the one with Lawrence Fishburne, and it was called the Tuskegee Airmen. And then there was another one called Red Tails, and we got to screen both of them. And he watched patiently with us, and we were so impressed. And he just said, "That's not the way it was at all." And he said, "That's really nice. That's very romantic." And all of that, he said, but it just is not a true portrayal because, and I said, well, why would you get involved with the Tuskegee Airmen? Why would you do that? And he said, well, we had a job and we just did it. It was just plain and simple. And then when the Red Tails came out, it was more action oriented, with the bombing and carrying on and so forth. But it's the stories behind the stories that really interest me because, they talk about the discrimination that was there. And they showed, in the first movie, they showed the discrimination between the officers and the enlisted men. But when these soldiers went off base, that is when the racism really manifested itself. My father was very light-skinned. And in fact, his nickname was Freckles, very light-skinned, freckles, sandy hair. And to some people, he did not look like an African-American. And so when he would walk down the street, if he was, this is in Tuskegee, and so he would, it was dangerous for the people to go off base, for the men to go off base. It was a dangerous thing. And at one point, they actually had a incident on base where the white officers and the black cadets had a fight in the dining hall over the whole seating privileges, because the thought was we're all in the same military. Racism should not be allowed here. And in fact, in the current military, it's not tolerated at all. But at that time, there was still great segregation, even though they were going through the same training. Another detail that I found, this was really amazing. There were women pilots that flew the planes from the north, where they were making the planes, to the south, and they were pulling targets for the cadets to shoot at. These were white women flying the planes. You don't hear about that story either. And my father confirmed that. He said, yeah, they were up there doing acrobatics so that we could shoot at the targets, and that's how we learned our gunnery skills. Wow.
Wow, so many stories behind these stories.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are, there's so many. My son Gideon, who's a history buff, and I don't even know if you got to talk.
I did meet him. Yes,
Gideon much. I mean, he's a real history buff, and he knows those things you just said, because he'll go, oh, this should be a movie, and he's got this little tidbit of a story about the Russian women that fought, about whatever. There's there's different things that are out there that he always says, oh, this should be a movie. And I'm like, well, figure it out. Go do it.
Get out there and do it.
Yeah.
There is one thing I absolutely have to say. Tomorrow, my mother turns 97 years old, and her name is Willie Pearl, and believe it or not, she was a riveter during World War II. So before they married, she was a riveter. She was very small. She was the size of Mamie. She was a peanut of a woman. And what she used to do was climb in. She and her girlfriends would climb into the gunnery area where they were supposed to be soldering, and they had stayed out the night before and needed a little bit of a nap. So they would climb in, the fuselage or wherever they were riveting, and the other one would take a nap. And then when they saw the supervisor, they would take their the tool and kind of bang on the side of the plane so they would wake up. But anyway, Mom, happy birthday, Mom. She turns 97 tomorrow.
Yep, that 97. That's a good birthday. I was just at a 90th birthday party down in Florida for a gentleman I'm actually writing a book for, who's had
It wasn't me, Doug.
And it wasn't you. No, but I was thinking that the Daves, you guys should sing happy birthday to her mom.
I think so too.
Do you think so too? Because let those two guys, because they really have great voices.
Oh, no.
I like how we get thrown to the wolves, Dave.
Yeah. Yeah.
All right, I'm going to lead us. You ready, Dave?
There you go.
Thank you,
Happy
Alan.
birthday
Oh, my goodness.
to you.
I'm not sure I can stomach this one.
Birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Willie Pearl. Happy birthday to you.
There we go. She got Happy Birthday by Dave Clark's first ever solo. I think we need a standing ovation from all the people out there in the Facebook world or something. So something. That was actually very good, Dave. That was very touching. It actually, I think we need to clip that and send that to your mom if she's not watching. Although she should be watching tonight, but I don't know if she has that technology. But
she will be watching again tomorrow, because actually my sister Adrian and her son Brandon are watching it together tonight. So we'll be sure if she sees it. Yeah.
So we got to make sure she gets that clip and you get some greetings. Happy birthday. You're getting some other happy birthdays here. And
thank you, Sharon.
Yeah, Sharon. And actually, Sharon,
thank you, Alan.
Sharon made another quote. She's become a fan of our show. I don't know how somebody could do this, but Sharon's told me, I think she's gone back and watched just about every one of our shows since she found out about the Pulling Each Other Along show. So she is a fan. So very good. And Tom Demolakis, he's throwing in here. Happy birthday. I think Dave he missed his calling. There you go. That's your new calling. Maybe we can have like one of those cameos where somebody will pay you $100 to sing happy birthday to him.
Craig Giuliani is doing.
Craig just joined in. Maybe he likes that idea. We'll set up cameos for Dave Clark to sing happy birthday.
I would pay $2.75 for that.
$2.75, he'll do it.
Well, that's $2.75.
Exactly.
$2.75.
That's right.
Oh, there you go. That's no good.
Let me tell you, my pitching was worse than my singing.
He used to sing while he was pitching, and maybe that was a problem.
No, maybe it was your smile that was worse. I don't know. You got the Colgate boys here.
Get that off.
I haven't been able to pull this picture out for a while. You guys haven't been on the show. The Colgate boys with the big smile.
That's great.
Anyway, so there's so much more we could talk about with you, Michelle. I mean, we're literally sitting on 40 minutes that people are still listening. Is there any last minute questions from? Okay, there we go. Somebody's already recorded it, so it's in history for forever. And
North Carolina.
North Carolina sending birthday wishes. So we're glad you're glad. And Michelle, from my perspective, thank you for not just talking about, we have so many people that talk about, what you do with Disability Dream and Do is great and all that stuff. And you didn't really know us from anybody, and you made the trek all the way up to Corning, New York with your sister, for our Disability Dream and Do sports camp when you were a part of it. And, you spent some days in Corning, learning our little town. And so thank you for that too.
And we're coming back in November. We're having a birthday. Yeah, my birthday's on the 5th. Hers is on the 8th.
It's for our
planning to join
painting.
you. Absolutely, we'll be back.
So I've got to I'm figuring out a date for that. So we've got to.
Okay.
What is this?
Dave, I have no knowledge of this.
No, you do. The art privé. The art privé.
Oh, yeah.
He knows.
I remember him.
Don't know. Before we go, though, I want to say hi to Al, Barb Perslopsky, Rossetti, and all the other lists, Tom and Laura, Craig. Rose is on tonight. Hi, Rose. And Rose McGee's on.
Yeah, you're the only one that's allowed to call her Rosie.
Well, we have a special connection.
There you go.
So there you go.
I talked with Rose earlier today, so she's down there in your hot Florida world.
And anyone else I didn't miss, I appreciate everybody watching and listening in.
Yeah, thank you. And so thank you for being a part of the show. Go ahead.
Yeah. Anyone that wants to follow up with me, they've put my website up before, but it's very easy. It's just michelleYgreen.com. There you go. Go onto the website. You'll see more pictures. You'll see my blog. You'll hear other podcasts. Hopefully, I'll be able to upload this at some point too. And if you have a story to tell, my blog is called Laughter is Medicine. And so if you have a story to tell that's uplifting, that goes along with the same lines as Disability Dream and Do, I'd love to hear from you. Also, connect on my Facebook page. And those of you particularly who have questions about writing, I'd love to hear from you too.
Well, we appreciate that. And, go, because now we can say it, we're not on the nonprofit radio anymore. So go get her book. What other books do you have that are out there?
Well, the 2 books that I have published, sadly, are out of print. And they're, believe it or not, they're books about my mother. One is called Willie Pearl. The second is Willie Pearl Under the Mountain. I'm currently in the teaching of writing program at Johns Hopkins University. And one of my goals is to go back and pick that series up again, because it was an award-winning series. The second book actually won the Multicultural Children's Book of the Year. And this is all well before COVID. This was back before there were a lot of multicultural books out there for children. So we were kind of on the frontier of that. And I want to go back. I've done a number of short stories, a number of poems, but my goal right now is to finish The Devil's Bargain. And then I'll turn my story back, my sights back to the Willie Pearl series. I also have a book underway about the film pioneer called Oscar Michaud, another person that a lot of people don't know. Before there was a Spike Lee, there was a Oscar Michaud, who was a Black homesteader, and of all places, he was in South Dakota, if you can believe it. He bought some land in South Dakota. It was called Indian land at the time, and he pitched a tent, didn't know anything about farming. And while he was waiting to break land, he started writing, and he wrote 7 books. And then he went into his own film production company, and he made thousands and thousands of films, literally.
Wow.
Yeah. And his name is Oscar Michaud. The manuscript is Oscar Invincible. And at some point I'll be able to go back and work on that too.
But A Strong Right Arm is available, right?
Yes. A Strong Right Arm, the story of Mamie Peanut Johnson.
Mamie Peanut Johnson.
And of course you can find it on the Big A, but if you have a local bookstore, I would prefer that you go to the local bookstore, even if it's not going to be on the shelf, but have them order it, because we need to, buy local if you can.
Very good. And that, and then we have this other book out there that if you haven't gotten that, we'd like you to get. So A Pound of Kindness. And soon we're going to be making some announcements about the Pulling Each Other Along book. It's just about getting ready. Todd and I have been putting a lot of work. We're going to hopefully announce the Pulling Each Other Along website, which is being developed, and give a shout out to Scope Designs that's doing my website. I just can't tell you how great of a design method that they've used, and working with Scope Design to put our website together. So shout out to Greg and his folks with Scope Design helping us with that as well. And let me go see. Is there any other last questions on the chat?
Well, one person that I missed, Doug, I think I saw earlier that Sue Swan was on. So
yeah.
Haven't talked to her in a long time, so I want to shout out to her as well.
And Paula was on too. Our most
See you, Paula. Hey, Paula.
Paula, our most recent Pulling Each Other Along Award winner, right?
Yes, she was on. Yes, she was. Yep.
So there we have that, and she's thanking you, Michelle. I think you all met. So
yeah, we did. Hey, Paula.
There you go. And so we got her on here. Craig, thanks for joining us as well. And mostly thank you, Michelle, for
my pleasure
joining us. Really in hopefully the early stages of this. This is also, just to know, this has been a test where we had not just going out on our Facebooks, but we had several other people broadcasting live on their Facebooks. It's a new process that we have, and so hopefully that worked well for everybody as well. And thank you for those that did that. Dave Clark did that, even though he doesn't know he did that. But he sang happy birthday on his own Facebook page.
And I have a cake to bake tonight.
Oh, you better get going.
And
that's why.
The recipe is on my website. It's called Death by Chocolate.
Oh wow! We're coming to Washington. We're coming down to Washington D.C. tonight. I've already driven enough. Well, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, for being on.
We should end with the music that Dave and Dave don't like.
Good to see you again, Dave.
All right. See you guys. See y'all next week. Hopefully, I don't know who our guest is next week, but we're going to try to have another show next week, and hopefully we see y'all. Although we'll be in North Carolina, so it could be a little tricky, but I'm going to try to do a guest from our North Carolina. We have Disability Dream and Do D3 Day coming up in Hickory, North Carolina next week. And you just got a note. There you go. So she just figured out how to comment. All right, just right. We caught her right at the end. Hi, Adrian. I owe you a call. I did talk to Rocky, but I got to talk to him some more. So anyway. Good evening, folks. Dave and Dave, everybody say goodbye.
Goodbye.
Another long show.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.